I live in a quiet suburb about 20 minutes outside the city. It's one of those neighborhoods where nothing ever really happens. Most of the homes are single-family houses, small yards, old trees, and neighbors who wave but don't really talk much beyond that. I liked it that way. A couple months ago, the house next door got sold. It had been sitting empty for a while after the old owner passed away. One morning, I saw a moving truck pull into the driveway. I watched through my window as a man, probably in his late 40s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, started unloading boxes. No family, no friends, no one helping him. Just him. I went out to get my mail, and he looked up. We made eye contact, and he gave me this half smile that didn't really reach his eyes. I nodded back, then went inside. I didn't think much of it at first. People move in, people move out. That's life. But almost immediately after he moved in, I started noticing weird stuff. The first night, I heard something that sounded like hammering at almost 3 a.m. It was soft, but just loud enough to be noticeable. I figured he was doing some renovations. I tried to ignore it, but the next night, same thing. Tapping, scraping, hammering, always after midnight. Always for about an hour. Then silence. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I told myself maybe he worked night shifts or had insomnia. But after a week straight of hearing strange sounds through my wall, I was getting tired and creeped out. One night, I heard what sounded like whispering. I thought maybe he had the TV on, but it wasn't constant. It would go quiet for long stretches, then suddenly I'd hear murmuring again like he was talking to someone. But when I stepped outside and looked through his front window, the house was completely dark. What really freaked me out, though, was the night I took my trash out and saw him standing in his backyard. Just standing, in the dark. No lights, no phone, nothing. Just staring into the woods behind our houses. I slowly walked back to my door and locked it behind me. A few days later, I noticed something else. He had started putting up blankets over his windows from the inside instead of using actual curtains, and there was this strong chemical smell coming from his garage, like bleach and something else I couldn't place. Then one evening, I saw him carrying something large and heavy into the house wrapped in a blue tarp. He kept looking over his shoulder while he did it. I stood behind my curtains watching, heart pounding. That's when I started documenting things, videos, notes, timestamps, just in case. About a week later, I heard banging coming from his house. This time it was loud, aggressive. It was around 2:30 a.m. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the wall. It sounded like furniture being moved, or something being dragged. I was about to call the police when everything went silent again. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next day, I saw a girl, probably mid-20s, standing in his driveway. I watched as she rang his doorbell a few times, looking nervous. He opened the door and they talked for a second before she stepped inside. Something about the way she kept glancing around made me feel uneasy. She didn't look like someone he knew well. About an hour later, I heard what sounded like screaming through the wall. It was brief, muffled, but I heard it. Then, nothing. I called the police. They showed up about 10 minutes later, but by then the house was dead quiet. The officer knocked for a while. No answer. Eventually, he left a card on the door and drove off. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, the blankets were down from the windows. The garage door was open, but the guy was gone. I watched all day, never saw him come or go. Then around midnight, I heard it again, whispering, followed by a soft knock on my back door. I froze. It knocked again. I slowly crept over and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I called the cops again. This time, 2 cars showed up. They knocked. No answer, but this time they had a warrant. They went inside. What they found still keeps me up at night. The house was nearly empty. A mattress on the floor, dozens of empty bottles of bleach, knives laid out on the kitchen counter, and a bunch of locks on the inside of the bedroom door. The room was soundproofed. The girl from a couple nights before, no one ever saw her again. They never found him either. He was just gone. They think he packed up and ran after the first police visit. Maybe he had done it before. Maybe he was planning to do it again. I put my house up for sale 2 weeks later, because every time I close my eyes, I see that man standing in the dark, staring through the woods, like he was waiting for something or someone. I work late shifts at a diner a few miles from my apartment. By the time I clock out, it's usually past midnight. The air is cooler, the streets quieter, and after standing on my feet for hours, I like to clear my head with a quick run before going home. It became a routine. Change into my running shoes, take a few laps around the neighborhood, then shower and sleep. My apartment complex sits at the edge of a residential area with long tree-lined streets. I never worried much about safety. I stuck to well-lit roads, kept my headphones low enough to hear my surroundings, and stayed aware of my route. I knew most of the faces in my neighborhood, at least enough to exchange polite nods. That was before I noticed him. The first time, I barely thought about it. I was jogging past a row of houses when I saw a man standing on his front porch, smoking a cigarette. He wasn't someone I recognized, but people move in and out all the time. He watched as I ran by, but I kept my eyes forward and didn't think much of it. A few nights later, I saw him again. This time, he wasn't on his porch. He was on the sidewalk, leaning against a street lamp a few houses down. I caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of my eye. He wasn't smoking, wasn't doing anything, just standing there, watching. I picked up my pace and turned down another street. The third time, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. It was past 1 a.m. when I laced up my shoes and stepped outside. The night was quiet, just the hum of distant traffic. I started my usual route, keeping to the sidewalk, passing by the same rows of houses. Then I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance behind me. He was there, a block back, walking, not running, not on a casual stroll, just moving at the same steady pace as me, matching my route. I told myself to stay calm. I wasn't even sure he was following me. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe it was nothing. I kept running, made a left turn, then another. When I glanced back, my stomach dropped. He had turned too. I wasn't imagining it. My heart started pounding. I wasn't far from my apartment, but I didn't want to lead him straight home. I needed to be sure. I picked up my speed, crossing over to the other side of the street. So did he. I turned again, this time onto a smaller side street with fewer houses, fewer lights. A stupid mistake. I risked another glance over my shoulder. He wasn't walking anymore. He was jogging. I could hear his footsteps now, heavy against the pavement, getting faster, getting closer. My body moved before my brain could. I bolted, sprinting down the sidewalk, adrenaline taking over. I didn't care about my usual route anymore. I needed to get away. I cut through someone's yard, jumped over a low fence, and ran back toward the main road. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept moving. When I finally dared to look back, he was gone. The street was empty. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment complex. I slammed the front door behind me, locked it, and stood there, panting, my hands shaking. For the next few nights, I stayed inside. I stopped running after work, but I still saw him, not on the sidewalk, not by the street lamp. He had moved closer, standing by the fence outside my apartment, just standing there, waiting. I told myself it was in my head. Maybe he was just some guy who lived nearby and walked around at night. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was off. A few days later, I had to work a double shift. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, but I still felt restless. I hadn't run in days, and my body ached for movement. I checked outside my window before stepping out. The street was empty. I told myself it was fine. I started jogging, keeping my pace steady, forcing myself to relax. I took a different route this time, sticking closer to the main road. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I glanced behind me. He was there, closer than before. I turned a corner, speeding up, hoping to lose him. but I could hear him too, his breathing, his footsteps hitting the pavement harder. I wasn't going to outrun him. Up ahead, I spotted an old gas station, its lights still on. I sprinted toward it, pushing myself as hard as I could. I burst through the doors, startling the cashier behind the counter. I forced a smile, pretending I wasn't terrified. I bought a water, lingered inside, and waited. Minutes passed. I peered through the window. The street was empty. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. I turned toward my apartment, walking fast but careful not to run. Then I saw it. His shadow, stretched out under the street lamp. He was standing at the corner, just watching me. I hurried home, locked every door, and checked every window. The next morning, I went to the leasing office and demanded a security camera be installed near my unit. The manager said he'd look into it. That night, I kept every light in my apartment on, and I never went running after work again. It was just past 11:30 p.m. when I heard the knock. I had just finished brushing my teeth, ready to crawl into bed after a long day. My apartment is on the second floor of a small, older building with thin walls and creaky floors. Most of the tenants are quiet, and I like it that way. Peaceful. Predictable. So when someone knocked at my door that late, I froze. At first I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was a sound from the TV upstairs or someone passing by. But then it came again, louder. 3 slow knocks. I tiptoed toward the door and looked through the peephole. It was my neighbor from downstairs. His name was Kevin. Maybe mid-30s, always wore the same flannel jacket, barely spoke more than a nod when we passed each other. He was standing there, looking up at the peephole like he knew I was watching. I opened the door, just a crack, and asked him what was going on. He said he had lost his key and was locked out of his apartment. He told me he had already called the emergency maintenance line, but they wouldn't come out until morning. Then he asked if he could crash on my couch for the night. It caught me off guard. I didn't know him. I barely ever talked to him. Something about the way he asked felt off, too casual, like he had planned this or practiced it. I told him I was sorry, but I wasn't comfortable with that. He just stood there for a second, not saying anything. Then he asked again, said it would only be for a few hours, said it was freezing outside and he didn't have anywhere else to go. I told him again I was sorry. I offered to call him a cab or even help pay for a cheap motel. But he shook his head. Then he asked if I had a blanket at least. Said he'd sleep right outside my door if I wouldn't let him in. That really unsettled me. I told him to wait, closed the door, and locked it. I grabbed an old blanket from my closet and opened the door again just enough to hand it through. He didn't thank me, he just took it slowly, staring at me the whole time like he was studying my face. Then he turned around and walked down the hall. I shut and locked the door again. I turned off all the lights but left the TV on for background noise, trying to make myself feel a little safer. I figured he'd sleep in the hallway and leave first thing in the morning. But a few minutes later, I heard something. A soft rattle. It was the doorknob. Someone was trying to turn it. Slowly. Then a whisper through the door. He was asking if I had a glass of water, said he was thirsty and didn't want to sleep with a dry mouth. I didn't respond. I just stood there in the dark, heart racing, waiting for it to stop. Eventually, it did. I heard his footsteps move away. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, every creak of the floor above made me jump. The next morning, I opened the door and looked down the hallway. No sign of Kevin, just the blanket folded neatly at my doorstep. I went downstairs to leave for work and passed by his door. It was wide open. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. I went straight to the property manager and told him what happened. He looked confused, said no one by that name lived in the building, that the unit below mine had been vacant for over 3 weeks. I asked if maybe he had just moved out. He shook his head and told me the locks had just been changed last week, No one should have been inside. I still don't know who he was or how he got in that unit. I haven't seen him since.